o'clock in New York, the president's longtime fixer, Michael Cohen, has drawn a new line in the sand, telling ABC News that his loyalty lies with his family and his country, not Donald Trump. Cohen also signaling his willingness to cooperate with special counsel Robert Mueller and breaking with the president by claiming that the Mueller investigation is not a witch hunt. But of even greater significance, Cohen will break a joint defense agreement with the president as soon as his new lawyer is fully on board. That's according to ABC News. It's a move that could suggest Cohen's plans to cooperate with federal investigators. For the non-lawyers among us, the president's former national security advisor, Mike Flynn, broke his joint defense agreement with the president just days before he flipped and became a cooperating witness in the Mueller probe. And there are more signs today that Cohen is willing to stand up to Trump. He tells ABC News, quote, "I will not be a punching bag as part of anyone's defense strategy. I'm not a villain in this story, and I will not allow others to try to depict me that way." But if Cohen will not be a punching bag, that's going to represent a change in the dynamic between Cohen and Trump. The New York Times reported back in April, for years, Mr. Trump treated Mr. Cohen poorly with gratuitous insults, dismissive statements, and at least twice, threats of being fired. Here to help us understand the significance of the latest news from Cohen and what it means for the man he once served, some of our favorite reporters and friends. Joining us from the Washington Post, senior political reporter Aaron Blake, and with us at the table, Mara Gay, journalist and a member of the New York Times editorial board, Mimi Rocha, former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, where all the action is all the time, now an MSNBC analyst, and Charlie Sykes, contributing editor for the Weekly Standard, host of the Daily Standard podcast, and an MSNBC contributor. Aaron, you write about this interview, this great interview that George Stephanopoulos did off camera with Michael Cohen. What leaps out at you for the blinking red lights for the president in this White House?
Well, he really kind of ticked every box as far as signaling a willingness to cooperate, a willingness to maybe flip against President Trump if it came to that. There have been a number of indications of this over the last couple of weeks. There were people talking anonymously to a couple outlets about how Michael Cohen was not happy with how the president had been treating him, maybe wanted some money for his legal defense in this case that he hadn't been getting. There was, of course, Michael Cohen stepping aside from the Republican National Committee and not just talking about it being because of the investigation, but also talking about it being a result of a policy difference that he had with the president. That seemed really conspicuous given that Michael Cohen doesn't generally talk about policy and in fact had pledged such loyalty to the president. So I think the totality of it and the fact that we now have Michael Cohen on the record here just speaks to the fact that he's getting perhaps somewhat desperate. He wants the president to understand where he's coming from. And now we see exactly how the president and his team might respond to this pretty outward political threat.
And also from that ABC News interview, Michael Cohen says, "Once I understand what charges might be filed against me, if any at all, I will defer to my new counsel, Guy Petrillo." Is that how you say it?
Yes.
For guidance. You know Guy. What's he likely to counsel Mr. Cohen to do?
Well, Guy is, so I know him, I worked for him in the U.S. Attorney's Office. He was chief of the criminal division, so a very high up person. He's a man of integrity. He's an excellent lawyer. He's going to do, honestly, he's going to counsel Michael Cohen to do what's in Michael Cohen's best interest. That's what makes him a good lawyer and a lawyer of integrity. So that's why I don't think that Donald Trump can buy his way out of Michael Cohen cooperating if Michael Cohen is so inclined to cooperate. I do not think that the impediment to that would be Donald Trump paying his legal fees, because I don't think that a lawyer like Guy Petrillo would counsel his client any differently. There are ethical rules around that, and I don't know if he would even take the money from Donald Trump, but even if he did, he could not take it if it would cause him to give different advice to his client. So if that's what this signal is about, you know, it's not going to go very far.
It's not going to work. Let's go down memory lane and look again at how Donald Trump reacted on the day of the search and raid of Michael Cohen's homes and offices, an attack on the country.
It's a disgrace. It's frankly a real disgrace. It's an attack on our country in a true sense.
So I also wanted to put up from our friend Jennifer Rubin what Cohen has on Trump. More settlements with women, potential financial crimes, financial ties to Russia, any meetings between Trump and Russians, or meetings Cohen took on Trump's behalf with Russians, and any other campaign contacts with Russians. Someone close to Cohen described what Michael Cohen could be sitting on as potentially nuclear for the president.
Yeah, there's no question about that. I mean, this guy has the crown jewels. Now, this interview is extraordinarily interesting because he's clearly signaling a new tack, but it's kind of a charm offensive from one of the least charming individuals in American politics right now. So, I mean, obviously he's trying to rehabilitate his public image. He's obviously trying to kiss up to the prosecutors, or at least present himself in a more favorable light. But also there is this, is he basically saying to the president, you know, I am out here, I'm you know, waving the hand that I'm not going to take a bullet for you. It's hard for me to imagine what the president could do in response to that, especially going into the Supreme Court nomination fight, that wouldn't be disastrous. But I mean, this is something, and I'll be honest with you. A few months ago, after that raid, if somebody would have said, you know, Michael Cohen will actually flip over on Donald Trump, I would have been very, very skeptical.
Yeah, what I'm interested in is, so far the Trump White House has been pretty successful at controlling the narrative because the Mueller team really can't respond yet, and so this is actually a huge threat, I think, to that control, because you essentially, when you pull back, you realize you have the president's former lawyer coming out and saying, and certainly under duress, yes, but saying, this is not a witch hunt. This is real. There's something here.
And why would you do that? I mean, is he trying to get a better deal? I mean, there's also been some anecdotal evidence that he's sort of prepared to be charged, that he knows and a pardon isn't on the table until you've been convicted of a crime, right?
Right, but I don't think, again, sort of like the legal fee issue, I don't think a pardon here is going to save Michael Cohen, because there's state exposure, there's civil exposure. We've already saw the Attorney General filing, you know, civil suit against Donald Trump, and that's moving quickly. So I don't view this as a call for help to the president. I think probably Michael Cohen is a man who really wants to talk. He likes to be in the spotlight. It sounded to me from what he didn't say in the interview that he is listening to the advice of his lawyer. This is a little bit of speculation, but I think probably Guy Petrollo didn't want him to do any interview, and Michael Cohen was determined to, and he said, fine, off camera, and don't answer any factual questions, because those are the questions that can get him into trouble.
Do you ever dissolve a joint defense agreement with someone if you're not going to flip? I mean, why else would you do that?
Well, if there's real acrimony in the relationship amongst, you know, defendants or subjects, I mean, it's an agreement that allows lawyers to share confidential information that would otherwise be protected by the attorney-client privilege in order to work towards a common goal. So it means your goal is not the same anymore.
Right.
That can be because one person's cooperating. There are some other circumstances where it could happen, but you're right. I mean, as you said at the beginning, when I heard that, assuming it's true, it hasn't happened yet, that would be the biggest flag that he's getting ready to cooperate.
And Aaron, I see you nodding on my monitor here. It was also the sign when Mike Flynn dissolved his joint defense agreement with the president's lawyers. That was the sign. That was sort of one of the last things that we knew about before news that he'd pleaded guilty and had become, as one former federal prosecutor said, a member of Team America, working for Bob Mueller. What is the degree of alarm that you and your colleagues at the Post are picking up from the president and his inner circle? We played that sound of him calling the Cohen raid an attack on America. It rattled him at the time, and I understand from you and your colleagues that it still angers him.
Yeah, it's been clear that, you know, there was that Roger Stone quote from back in April in that New York Times story that you mentioned, where he basically said that the president has treated Michael like garbage for all these months and for all these years. Michael Cohen has always seemed like somebody who has been trying to get in Donald Trump's inner circle, apparently wanted to work in the White House. That never came to fruition. Had this consulting business on the side, which of course has been the subject of lots of probing here. I do think that joint defense agreement part is a key point here. This is not just Michael Cohen coming out and saying, I may flip on the president, or hinting in that direction. This is actually his legal defense going in a different direction. This is not necessarily a hint that there will be a flip involved here, but it's a necessary component of going down that road. It's necessary, but not totally sufficient. And so I think that This is him sending a message and actually kind of putting his money where his mouth is as far as his legal strategy. And now we have these two defenses at least heading off in divergent directions, if not adversarial ones.
And let me pick up on Aaron's point there, because he also said in that interview that I don't agree with those who demonize or vilify the FBI. I respect the FBI as an institution as well as their agents. He also refused to criticize the Mueller investigation, as we've said. His other client was Sean Hannity, who is the quarterback of the Bash the FBI team, with all of the House Republicans sort of playing supporting roles. He's now at odds with the entire sort of public-facing Trump, Bash, Justice, and FBI.
No, that was a really good point before, that this is very, very much off message. You know, you have Trump world who've been very, very consistent in demonizing and degrading this investigation. And here you have Michael Cohen, who, you know, poses a unique threat to Donald Trump. Remember,
Let's put that up again.
Trump business is not a publicly held company.
Right. You know? Women, financial crimes, financial ties to Russia, any meetings between Trump and Russians or meetings that Cohen took on their behalf, and campaign conduct. I mean, that's the whole enchilada, right?
What does the fixer do?
What's missing?
Yeah, what does the fixer do?
What we know.
He does the dirty business, right? He does the stuff that needs to be taken care of, you know, for a very, very secretive organization, a very secretive man, you know, despite his public profile. So we have no idea what sort of a box we're opening up here, but Donald Trump does.
Exactly. Let me put up Donald Trump doing the old coffee boy trick, distancing himself from Michael Cohen.
Well, as a percentage of my overall legal work, a tiny, tiny little fraction. But Michael would represent me and represent me on some things. He represents me, like with this crazy Stormy Daniels deal. He represented me, and, you know, from what I see, he did absolutely nothing wrong.
The crazy Stormy Daniels deal, and I remember that sound came before or after Rudy Giuliani told America and the world through Fox News that they simply funneled money through Michael Cohen from the president.
Well, it's funny that you would bring up Rudy Giuliani, because he's been quite quiet.
I think he's on vacation.
He might be on vacation, legitimately. But the silence from the White House, I mean, usually I feel like when the president is a little anxious about something, the rest of America knows and is made to feel anxious as well through his tweets, his tweet storms. But their relative silence on this, you know, I just wonder if that means that they're... What does that mean? Are they even more nervous?
Aaron, do you have any thoughts on that? And then let me ask you a second part of the question. He did signal to, I believe it was Mike Flynn, stay strong through his Twitter feed. He has been oddly quiet in recent days, at least since this interview popped up this morning on Michael Cohen.
Yeah, we may remember the last thing that he was kind of conspicuously quiet about also had to do with Cohen. That was when the whole Stormy Daniels thing was really beginning there. He didn't tweet at her for a number of months. He didn't seem to want to talk about it. We all assumed that maybe this was because the situation was pretty personal for him, having to do with his personal life, his family life. Maybe it was just because he didn't like talking about this particular legal issue as well. You know, having somebody like Michael Cohen come after you and say that, you know, I may turn on you, essentially, like he did in this interview, and then having the president not fight back at all, not at least send some kind of a message in response. You know, it's a conspicuous lack of engagement on this. But then again, you know, Trump's attitude towards Cohen has been somewhat odd from the start. You know, we've been talking about his legal team has talked with Paul Manafort about pardons, talked with Michael Flynn about pardons, according to our reporting. But apparently we haven't had those kinds of conversations with Cohen, and Trump apparently treats Cohen pretty poorly, according to Roger Stone. So I think this relationship really contains multitudes in ways that we may find out a little bit more about pretty soon here.
And that story, Mimi, that Aaron and I both referenced was one of the stories that Donald Trump got on Twitter the day that it ran. Maggie Haberman and a couple of her colleagues had a byline on that story and attacked them. And that's usually a Trumpian tell, not that the story's fake, but that they struck a nerve, that it's too true for Donald Trump. I want to ask you one more question, though, about how much of this is public-facing and how much of this is unknown to us. This case was referred to the Southern District because Bob Mueller either viewed it outside his scope, or could there be any other reason?
No, I mean, it sounds to me from everything I've read like he legitimately viewed this as not right now having to do with the Russian station.
So what might Bob Mueller have kept for himself when it comes to Michael Cohen?
Well, Well, I mean, I think if Michael Cohen came in and cooperated and talked, which he would have to, about, did he have meetings with Russians, or does he know about them?
We know he did, right? He was working on the Trump Tower in Moscow.
Right.
He emailed the public affairs person.
Yeah, and so that could easily go back over to the Mueller camp. There might be I think Mueller did the right thing by sending sort of the bulk of it, if you will, what they had at the time, which sounds like it related most to Stormy Daniels, to bank fraud, to
taxi medallions.
Yeah, wire transfer. I mean, that would be weird for him to be doing, and there would be all sorts of criticism. So he did absolutely the right thing, sent it here. But to the extent that there is stuff that now comes out, especially through his cooperation, there may even be stuff in the evidence, right? We don't know that, and that could already have been shared. So there is, as you say, stuff that could be going on already beneath the surface, where Southern District has given Mueller, I don't know, things that were taken in the search that might have to do with Russia. I use that broadly. And one other thing, I think it's interesting to note that he said in his interview, Michael Cohen said, "I'm not the villain here, and I'm not going to let someone else paint me as that." As if there is a villain here. He's not saying, I know we keep going back to this, but Michael Cohen is not saying no one did anything wrong. He's not saying that anymore. He's saying I didn't do anything.
Who's the villain?
Right, which is probably not true, but
who's the villain, Charlie?
Well, we'll find out.
Hopefully, hope springs eternal. Mimi Rocha and Aaron Blake, thank you both so much for getting us started. When we come back, lost in translation, was Donald Trump duped? New reporting from NBC News suggests North Korea is proceeding full steam ahead with their nuclear program, despite the pomp and circumstance in Singapore last month. And if he can't wrestle North Korea's one-man dictatorship to the ground, how's he going to stand up to Vladimir Putin at a summit later this month? Also ahead, the right's favorite punching bag, former FBI agent Peter Strzok, has testified in a closed session and offered to do so in a public one. But Republicans won't release those transcripts. What are they hiding?
Kim Jong-un, who I despise because of the brutality that he has put upon the North Korean people. But unfortunately, I think he has been masterful in how he has manipulated perceptions and how he's manipulated and quite frankly, duped Mr. Trump.
Well, it turns out the former CIA director was right. In an NBC News exclusive, we learned North Korea has expanded nuclear production. NBC News writing, quote, U.S. intelligence agencies believe that North Korea has increased its production of fuel for nuclear weapons at multiple secret sites in recent months, and that Kim Jong-un may try to hide those facilities as he seeks more concessions in nuclear talks with the Trump administration. This news from U.S. officials stands in stark contrast to Trump's announcement right after last month's summit in Singapore that there is, quote, no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea. According to reports, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will head to Pyongyang later this week. Joining us now are two of the NBC reporters who broke this story, Courtney Cubey and Ken Delaney. And first of all, congrats, you guys. This story woke me up over the weekend and got everyone's attention. Take us through some of what you're reporting. I want to read a little bit more of this. The intelligence assessment, which has not been previously reported before you guys broke this story, seems to counter the sentiments expressed by Donald Trump in that tweet we just read. Analysts at the CIA and other intelligence agencies don't see it that way, according to more than a dozen American officials who are familiar with their assessments and spoke on the condition of anonymity. So this seems to be a story about everything that's wrong with the creation of foreign policy, the clash between the president's Twitter feed and the people who actually craft and carry out the policy at the CIA and the Pentagon. Courtney, you want to start?
Well, that's right, Nicole. So basically what we found over the course of our reporting last week was not just that North Korea was not decreasing its production or its enrichment of uranium, but that at least one location it was increasing it. And that not only that, but U.S. intelligence was confident that North Korea was already working to deceive the United States. And, that is particularly interesting given the news that we're getting this week that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is going back to North Korea later this week. One of the next steps in this diplomatic process, of course, would be for North Korea to hand the U.S. a document or a declaration that would include locations or information about their nuclear program. And now, if the U.S. knows or is confident that North Korea is already working to deceive them, what will that declaration look like? It's possible, that they won't include everything that the U.S. knows that they already have. So it's the fact that the deception part, that in and of itself this week is really, really striking to me, Nicole.
Ken, let me play the president on just how much he trusts Kim Jong-un from June 12th. Let's watch it and talk on the other side.
This was very important. It's in the first paragraph, and it says complete, total denuclearization. Without that, I wouldn't have been interested. I believe that he wants to get it done.
You trust him?
I do trust him, yeah.
So has Kim Jong-un made a fool of Donald Trump, Ken?
It's hard to know what's going on here, Nicole. Is there some grand strategy behind this? Is Trump acting like a real estate developer and touting a project before it's built? But it's really unclear whether he has come to grips with the reality of the situation. Look, if there's some good news here, it's that the U.S. has clearly improved its intelligence collection capabilities against what's always been the hardest target, North Korea, the hermit kingdom, closed society, very little internet connection. And they've gotten some really interesting insights into their nuclear program and found, as Courtney said, that they are enriching nuclear fuel at secret sites, and more importantly, that they're working to deceive actively the Trump administration about that. And this is evidence that was recently garnered, we understand, including in the weeks after the summit. And so the question is the intelligence community conveying that to Donald Trump, and is he acting on it? I mean, John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, suggested on television yesterday that they are well aware that North Korea played games, but Donald Trump doesn't seem to be saying that. He seems to say that there is no more nuclear threat from North Korea, that he believes what Kim is telling them, that this is all proceeding in good faith. And there's even a report that they're talking about a second meeting between Trump and Kim in September at the United Nations. That would be incredible if it goes forward, given the evidence that we've reported U.S. intelligence is gathering.
Courtney, you and I have talked at other moments. You broke a great story, I think, last week about Defense Secretary Mattis being out of the policymaking, decision-making loop. Is there any indication you're reporting that the new CIA Director, Gina Haspel, maybe out of that sort of inner sanctum of foreign policymaking and decision-making, at least in terms of what the president says in tweets from the Oval Office?
You know, that's actually not something that we focused on. That would be actually a great idea for a story that we should pursue.
I'm here to help. I'm here to
don't give any ideas to our competitors, Nicole. I mean, it would be a great one to pursue. I mean, one thing that it has become very clear, and Ken brought this up, is the intelligence gathering on North Korea really has picked up under the Trump administration. We know that the CIA created a North Korea mission center, of course, but the officials that we spoke with last week said that it's really paying dividends. The question is, how is that translating into policy, or is it translating into policy? Ken mentioned John Bolton yesterday. Senator Lindsey Graham also was on the Sunday shows yesterday and said, it's no surprise. We all expect North Korea to deceive. We expect them not to hold up their end of the bargain. So it seems to be coming from all of these people in the administration and in the government, except for President Donald Trump. And the question is, is the intelligence community actually sharing this information with him, or is he even listening, Nicole? I mean, and it's a great parallel to what happens when it comes to Russia. I mean, his cabinet goes out, they testify. Christopher Wray, Admiral Rogers, they all testify under oath before Congress. They say, yes, Vladimir Putin remains intent on meddling with our elections. When they're asked under oath if the president has asked them to do anything, Christopher Wray has testified, no, he has not. Admiral Rogers, with body language that spoke a million words, slumped over the table, said, what are we doing to deter Putin? Nothing. And we're about to go face-to-face with a man who's a lot more than a one-man dictatorship with a nuclear parade. I mean, how does this position the United States of America on the eve of a summit with Vladimir Putin, Ken?
Not well, Nicole, not well at all. I mean, look, the bizarre thing about this whole North Korea situation is, you can't argue that they have violated the deal, because there really is no deal. That's what analysts keep telling us, and the only person who doesn't seem to understand that is Donald Trump, because he told the American public there was a deal, that they have agreed to denuclearize. They have agreed to no such thing. And there are many smart analysts who have been following this program for many years who say that this just isn't going to happen. This regime is not going to give up its weapons. And they're certainly not going to do it in a year, as John Bolton suggested on television yesterday. Retired Admiral James Stavridis said that that's about as likely to happen as Mexico is going to pay for the wall.
And I know a lot of Republicans were not fans of the Iran deal, but there was certainly more in place to sort of protect American interests in the Iran deal. There was evidence they were complying. There was evidence the program had been halted. Either the president's been played for a fool, or they're lying to their 40% of the country that's going to believe them no matter what actually happens.
What's amazing about this, again, is how bad Donald Trump is at this. The art of the deal co-author, whatever. And clearly he has been played. And the question is whether he has been duped willingly or unwillingly.
We're back to witting or unwitting.
Right, exactly. And whether he's going to correct this. But you asked the key question. You know that Vladimir Putin is watching this, and all the world leaders are getting the measure of the man. So we're going into this the summit with Putin, where the president is floating out all sorts of concessions again without getting anything in return. Clearly, having wanted a deal so much with North Korea, that is he willing to turn a blind eye? Because this stuff really matters. That tweet that North Korea no longer poses a nuclear threat. Historians are going to look back on that perhaps as one of the decisive moments of our time and a real low point in American diplomacy.
And where does Donald Trump go? I mean, he's alienated all of our traditional allies by fighting with Canada. It's very hard to fight with Canada. By alienating, the EU and Angela Merkel and France and the UK. He's now cozied up to dictators who are playing him like a fool.
Yeah, I mean, Vladimir Putin's got to be looking at this, and he can declare victory already. Right. Really. I mean, they don't even have to meet. I mean, the victory, the goal for Putin is to do exactly what he's managed to do with the aid of Donald Trump, which is break up the alliances that have kept him from being a major player on the world stage. And it's also just a little bit scary, just pulling back a little bit, to think about what the plan B is here for someone like John Bolton. I mean, the president does not like to be embarrassed. We can only hope that this is not some kind of perverse setup for John Bolton, who's extremely hawkish, to find some excuse to take this to the next level. I mean, the stakes were already high, and we could just hope that tensions cool down.
All right, in and out of the White House, right? Yeah. Courtney Kube, congrats on the scoop. Thank you so much. Ken sticking around. After the break, slow-walking justice. Why are House Republicans trying to stop the probe into Russian meddling in the 2016 election? The Department of Justice has until this Friday to turn over to the House extremely sensitive internal documents having to do with the Russia investigation. That's a deadline set chiefly by the president's conservative allies in Congress, who have been accusing the DOJ of withholding information. But today, those same Republicans are being accused of withholding information themselves, namely the private testimony of FBI agent Peter Strzok. They didn't have any problem alluding to his testimony during Thursday's explosive hearing on Capitol Hill, but that private conversation with Strzok, in which he defends himself and his actions to lawmakers behind closed doors, has not been released in full. The Washington Post reports, quote, Strzok certainly doesn't act like someone with anything to hide. He offered to testify publicly and without a subpoena. He didn't take the Fifth or demand immunity. Unlike the president and his dealings with special counsel Robert Mueller, Strzok did not haggle for months over the terms or scope of an interview. Nevertheless, Congress first threatened to subpoena him unnecessarily and then chose to keep his testimony under wraps. These congressmen, who claim to be interested in transparency and full disclosure, should be eager to make Strzok's testimony public, particularly since the president claims that that testimony will provide evidence of the witch hunt against him. So what are they hiding? Ken's still with us. Ken, you've got some reporting of your own I want you to bring to all of us, but also there is no one man who has served as a larger or more badly beaten punching bag for the president's sort of conspiracy theory of a witch hunt than FBI agent Peter Strzok.
That's very true, Nicole. And in fairness, he brought it on himself. And I think he would acknowledge that, and he sort of did.
And he did, right?
My sources are telling me, two Democratic sources are telling me, who are familiar with Strzok's testimony last week, said he regretted those inflammatory texts and was sorry that he sent them. But he said at the end of the day, he was operating in pursuit of evidence, not out of bias. And then even if he was biased and was trying to steer an investigation in one way or another, he wouldn't have been able to do it because he was part of a large team. He wasn't the leader. He was a senior team member, and he was not in a position to hold sway over either the Clinton email investigation or the Russia investigation. Interestingly, I asked these sources, why are the Republicans hiding this testimony? Why won't they release it? Is there something particularly damaging to their cause? And they said they didn't think it was that. They just thought that the Republicans want to have Strzok back in a public hearing, and they don't want to sort of dilute the record and have his testimony out there in writing. They want to ask these questions and try to make them as embarrassing as possible out in public, Nicole.
You know who agrees with with the reporting that Ken Delanian has about the testimony, the IG report that Donald Trump and his allies like to wave around as evidence that most of these people who work for former FBI Director Jim Comey were somehow part of a plot against him. So this just doesn't hold up. It's sort of Uranium One. It's Mueller mob family. It's part of just the bogus clown show that happens on Fox News every night.
Right, but it's been very, very effective as a weapon. I mean, he is the piñata, and Ken is absolutely right. He brought a lot of it on himself with his reckless behavior.
But let's talk about his reckless behavior. So this was one tweet or one text that he sent to somebody he was in a relationship with. But if you look at the body, I mean, he is sort of the typical, not typical, but one of the typical profiles of an FBI agent where they don't like politicians in either party. He was also very critical of Eric Holder, of Bernie Sanders, of Chelsea Clinton. There were plenty of Democrats who were on the receiving end of insults sent to the same individual as this one.
But I also think that this highlights two, shall we say, disingenuous arguments that House Republicans are making. Number one, they have been posing for holy pictures as, you know, that everything needs to be out in the open. We are in favor of transparency, which is why, you know, they're unmasking all of these folks. The second is that we're just doing our job of oversight, except that this Republican Congress is not exercising oversight over the Trump administration in virtually any other field aggressively. So there's something, there's two kind of big lies here, is that we want everything out in the open, and that we are simply doing our job, you know, as, you know, under the Constitution, when in fact, when you think about all of the things that have happened under the Republican Congress, their willingness to go along and to be complicit in this undermining of this investigation, I think, is one of the low points.
Let's play Donald Trump trying to field some answers or coming up with nonsense about the documents that you've been reporting on, Ken.
Why don't you just direct your subordinates to get those documents over to Congress? Are you going to do it?
The one thing I want to stay uninvolved in, at least for now, I may get involved. But I've been told by so many people, don't get involved. You know, other people got involved and it's not good. And they'll get the documents, and they're getting them, and they're great people. I didn't like the scene the other day where everybody's screaming at each other. You know, I don't like that because it's bad for the country. You know, if Russia is in fact looking to sow discord or chaos, they've got to be saying, this is the greatest thing we've ever done.
On that we agree, Mr. President. Ken Delanian, I'm told by a senior Justice Department official that they refer to the process as accommodating these document requests. They've brought in a former U.S. attorney whose only job is to accommodate these document requests, and that everything they've asked for has either been turned over or is in the process of being redacted for national security purposes or otherwise reviewed, but that there is nothing being withheld from this noisy faction in Congress, and that the only thing they find curious is the public nature of this debate.
I think that's true, Nicole, and it's also a very sad state of affairs because what's being turned over is unprecedented. It's going to set a negative precedent for years to come because it involves internal documents about a pending criminal investigation, which until now Congress was not entitled to and did not ask for, and these members know that. James Comey set somewhat of a precedent when he turned over FBI 302s, the detailed notes of interviews in the Clinton investigation, to Congress. He also turned over classified emails, but that investigation was closed. Nonetheless, that was used as a precedent to open this door, and now we're down a road where does this end? I mean, if Congress starts demanding files in an open FBI investigation, what if the defendant's innocent and then stuff gets leaked suggesting, for example, they were involved in insider trading, but they're actually not guilty? Or what if they are guilty and witnesses change their story because that stuff was leaked because it was turned over to Congress? It's just it's a sorry state of affairs. But Donald Trump gave a very shrewd answer there, I thought, because he doesn't want to appear to be demanding these documents directly from the Justice Department, even though that's within his right.
From what he wants done and what Rudy says on Fox News and what these guys do in testimony with their own appointees. These are Donald Trump's appointees to run the Justice Department and the FBI.
And that certainly is the way it appears. But you know, these members of Congress are doing Donald Trump's bidding, and they're making these demands of career Trump appointees, but career Justice Department officials who are trying to preserve the integrity of the Justice Department. But they know at the end of the day, Donald Trump is not going to back them, so they're turning all this stuff over. But it doesn't look like the president is forcing them to do it. But that, I think, is actually what's happening, Nicole.
Ken comes back, and I have to refill my Ambien prescription. Scary stuff. Up next, with the president set to announce his Supreme Court nominee in a week, we're learning more about who he's considering.
In the morning, during the morning, I interviewed and met with 4 potential justices of our great Supreme Court. They are outstanding people. They are really incredible people in so many different ways, academically and every other way. And I had a very, very interesting morning. Very interesting, though, was my 4 meetings. I'll be meeting with 2 or 3 more, and we'll make a decision on the United States Supreme Court, the new justice. That'll be made over the next few days, and we'll be announcing it on Monday.
President Trump kicking his Supreme Court justice nominee decision process into high gear. But a few centrist Republicans could spell doom for his choice, like Senator Susan Collins of Maine.
Candidate for this important position who would overturn Roe v. Wade would not be acceptable to me, because that would indicate an activist agenda that I don't want to see a judge have.
The president interviewed 4 candidates for about 45 minutes today, and the Washington Post reporting on some of the qualifications he might be looking for. They write, quote, one advisor said, Trump insists upon an extraordinarily well-qualified nominee with a superlative resume. The president is especially drawn to contenders with name-brand degrees, such as from Ivy League universities like Harvard or Yale. He also wants to see a portfolio of solid academic writing. I'm sorry. Though this advisor acknowledges that Trump doesn't care to read it. Of course he doesn't. He just wants to know it exists. Joining us now for, that's my favorite thing I've read all day. Let me see that again. He wants someone with a portfolio of solid academic writing, though he doesn't want to read it. That's awesome. I love the Washington Post. Harry Litman's here, former U.S. Attorney and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General. Go.
Go me?
Go you. I don't even know what to say. So he wants, I mean, we're back to central casting. He wants someone that looks the part, has written
Yeah, but let's talk about Neil Gorsuch, because I think actually you played that clip from Susan Collins, why I won't vote for anyone who overrule Roe v. Wade. I hate to be relentlessly negative, but I think the worst thing that happened over the weekend was the flip side of that interview. She said a couple sentences later, she was confident that Justice Gorsuch wouldn't. Why is that? In his confirmation hearings, he described Roe as law of the land, just as Justice Roberts had described Roe as settled law. I think it's 100% clear that whoever the nominee is going to follow that same script. And if Collins really believes that Gorsuch passes that test and she's unconcerned about a 4th person there, it lays the groundwork for her to say, whoever it is, oh, see, they've expressed respect for the precedent of Roe, and it makes it very, it's foreboding that she would then have her own established test passed by this new nominee.
So, Harry, first of all, your relentless negativity is what ties us together. I love it. Don't ever stop. But let me ask you, I mean, are there any names on that list that don't meet that sort of Gorsuch test as you just defined it? Doesn't everyone on that...
who would say outright they would overrule?
Well, who wouldn't have to? I mean, your point is that Gorsuch didn't have to say outright that he would overturn Roe v. Wade. He said enough to bring along senators like... I mean, I think you're making a more nuanced point, that there are people on that list who may say the right things to get a Collins vote, but on the bench, they may very well not be protectors of Roe.
Oh, I would say everybody on that list,
right? I mean,
depending on what you mean by protectors.
Right.
And there are many, many ways to basically demolish Roe without having to say the words. There are some on the list who have actually had some hostile statements in the past. But everyone, I think of, Allison Ide and Joan Larson and Amy Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh, I think they are in the pole position. All of them will be careful to say Roe is quote-unquote settled law. All of them also won't commit, 100% to never overturning settled law. There'll be a stalemate there, and you'll have to hope for the best, and that's not a very good, position for people to be in as far as abortion rights go, especially because it's just not a question simply of overruling Roe. It can be really essentially asphyxiated, to nothing without having to expressly overrule it, which likely Chief Justice Roberts would not want to do because of the cost to the court.
You agree with that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I was talking with a senior Senate aide over the weekend who said that the number one goal right now is to convince Susan Collins that that Justice Roberts would never be the fifth vote to overturn Roe because he is so institutionally conservative, that it would simply be too radical from a legal point of view, but also socially and politically, and that's just not his judicial philosophy. So a lot of it is not necessarily focused on the nominee because they've all been pre-vetted, but it is to say that, look, the court as it is constituted would not do this, but that doesn't mean that they would not shrink it around the edges, that they wouldn't stop the expansion, and that it would not be a number of, as applied decisions that would be, not favorable to pro-choice interests.
How is this threat to Roe v. Wade not enough to light every Democrat's hair on fire and have them in the street? I mean, their response since Kennedy's resignation has been tepid at best.
It's remarkable. I'm beginning to wonder if Democrats just don't know what to do with themselves. They don't know how to organize around this issue.
This is potentially the most fundamental change. It would sort of be before and after. This is potentially another generation of young people, boys and girls, men and women, growing up with the. It just represents such a social regression.
No, it really does. I don't know exactly what the problem is, but one issue might be that it's actually been a generation or so since this has been since abortion has been not legal, and so I think
2 or 3
we might be missing that sense of urgency.
Oh gosh, all right. When we come back, the story breaking the last hour: potential new evidence linking Paul Manafort to Russian. Brand new reporting from the Associated Press may provide evidence that former campaign chairman Paul Manafort was operating as a pawn of Russian intelligence. As we learn more about Konstantin Kilimnik, the pro-Russian official just indicted alongside Manafort in Bob Mueller's probe. The AP writes today, quote, during the special counsel's Russia investigation, Konstantin Kilimnik has been described as a fixer, translator, or office manager to Trump's ex-campaign chairman Paul Manafort. But Kilimnik was far more involved in formulating pro-Russia political strategy with Manafort than was previously known, according to internal memos and other business records obtained by the AP. Ken is still with us. Ken, first of all, a whole lot of fixers in Donald Trump's orbit, one. And two, this certainly inches back closer to the questions and answers, possible answers about Russian collusion.
Yeah, because it really suggests that it offers further evidence that Paul Manafort may have been acting as a pawn of Russian intelligence. And let me explain. This man, Konstantin Kilimnik, is a former Soviet military officer, and he's been identified by Robert Mueller as having ongoing ties to Russian intelligence during the campaign. Mueller called him Person A in the filings, but it's been widely reported that that's Kilimnik. And he was Manafort's Manafort. He was the translator, the right-hand man, the fixer for 10 years as Manafort was earning tens of millions of dollars from these Russian-backed Ukrainian politicians. So if he was actually a Russian intelligence asset during that time, then you have Manafort coming to the Trump campaign, by this time badly in debt, including to some of these Russian oligarchs, offers to work for free, and is in the middle of all these Russian contacts, offering to brief Oleg Deripaska, this Russian oligarch, during the campaign on the Trump campaign. And so it really paints a disturbing picture. It also raises the question of how did Manafort get hired in the first place? This wasn't a secret, these Russian ties that he had coming into the campaign. This was well known, and any FBI or sort of private detective background check on him would have turned up even more disturbing evidence that Trump apparently either wasn't interested in or never asked the question.
Harry Levin, I believe it was the Trump family that brought him in. And let me just ask you, I mean, this is, I don't want to insult any writers of thrillers, but this is like a bad thriller. I mean, this is sort of like the bad plot that doesn't get published. What would Bob Mueller's interest be in this Kilimnik, Manafort, Trump campaign connection?
Well, look, I mean, what this reporting does really is confirm what we've kind of already known. I mean, Manafort and Kilimnik were thick as thieves, literally. And he worked with Kilimnik, and this is who he was, and this is how he got rich. But it also means they were so closely aligned that any action, we're looking for an actual connection between Russian, especially government, and action, especially in the Trump campaign. So you think about Manafort's, say, an integral role in changing the Republican platform to make it, to change the position on Ukraine. You think about his role in the June 2016 meeting. If Kalimnik, who's his man in Moscow, is sort of right behind there, is prompting things with Manafort that makes the link clear and sets up a conspiracy case. We do know if there is going to be any bridge built between the U.S. and Russia, Manafort and Kalimnik are going to be central pillars to it.
Harry Littman and Ken Delaney, and thank you so much for spending some time with us. We have to sneak in our last